This is Chrissy.
This is Shirin.
And this is Two Girls Talking Shit.
Each episode will have deep discussion and conversation on topics that matter to us, ranging from wellness to politics.
Of course, with a healthy dose of pettiness, side-eye, and shade.
You ready, Chrissy?
You ready, Shirin?
This is
TGTS. Hey, this is Chrissy.
This is Shirin.
And this is Two Girls Talking Shit. And today we're talking all about identity.
Yeah, this is a conversation we had actually on our cab ride together back from our amazing weekend in New Orleans. So Chrissy, me, and Allison Tenney, we took a girls trip and we went to New Orleans, which was the first time for me and Chrissy.
Yes.
And it was incredible. It was such an incredible trip. Chrissy, tell us about some of your highlights.
Oh my gosh. So first of all, it was so much fun. We had perfect weather. Which, yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's because we brought the sunshine or what, but it was amazing weather. And of course, it was just great spending time with you and Allison. But my highlight of the trip was this amazing Black history, a tour we went on. It was like a tour that discussed the history of slavery and African-American life in New Orleans. And Shirin, you found it on the Instagrams, right, from someone you follow. And it was the most amazing tour. I just felt like I learned so much. And it's just, the city of New Orleans is so rich in history. I mean, a lot of it's problematic history, right? Yeah. But it was really good to see that perspective. And I feel like those are some of the things that sometimes people like to pass over really briefly. But he gave us so much incredible, important history about the struggles of life in New Orleans that are still occurring today, and statues that need to be taken down and all these things. And then obviously the food. There's always the food.
Yeah, no, so the tour we went on, if anyone is interested, is called Hidden History Tours. The guy who organizes it is a professor. So if you go to the website, it is not the most sexy, quote unquote, website you'll ever see, but it was the most, I would say hands down, the best tour I've ever been on. Just really educational. And he was just it was like a funny old man,
He was like a grandpa.
Yeah, there's nothing better than a funny old non-racist man.
Yeah, well, non-racist part always makes it better. Always.
So it was really, really incredible. I think, to be in a place that has such a rich history, but we were talking about this where the history is hundreds of years old, but also the history is tens of years, like Katrina as well. There's such recent history there that really is such a reflection of Black life in America. It was just really it was very interesting to be there. I really love the city. It had a really cool energy to it. It's definitely a quirky city. But that was just a really, especially as a Canadian, I don't know, it's really, really interesting. So that was definitely the highlight of my tour, that tour, but also the food was incredible.
Those biscuits. Can we talk about the biscuits for a minute?
We went to this place. I think it's called Willa Mays.
Yeah, Willa Mays. Something like that.
Oh my gosh. If anyone is in New Orleans, you need to go to Willa Mays. These biscuits were it was butter personified. I know that makes no sense, but it was flaky. It was delicious. It was when they say I hate this term, worth every calorie. But if we're going to diet
that.
culture,
we're going to do it.
Worth every damn calorie. It was so good. Yeah.
So much so that we went back, right? We went twice. That's how good we thought it was. We were forget it. We can get up early and go before we go to the airport because it's that worth it.
It was amazing. And then also we went to, oh my God, obviously we like sweets. We liked everything, but District Donuts.
Oh, unreal. This is from a donut connoisseur. I've tried a lot of donuts in my life, people. Yeah. A lot, and I'm not exaggerating. But let me tell you, District Donuts, it's at the top of the list.
Yeah. It was incredible. So we had a great time in New Orleans, but also the fact that we got to spend time together, the three of us, all of us, well, now Chrissy lives in New York, but Allison does not live here. She is far away from us. So it was really nice to just connect in one place. You forget how much you need that until you actually see each other and you're like, I missed you. I really missed you.
Yeah, it was so much fun. It was so great. I had the best time.
Okay. So I think it's really interesting because we were in a city where the identity there, right, of who you are is so complicated in New Orleans, right? Especially because we're talking about identity. We're talking about ethnic, racial, societal, like all those things. So no wonder on our cab ride home, we started talking about this concept of how we identify and growing up, how we had to kind of navigate our identities, right? So
Right.
Chrissy, tell me a little bit about, like, especially growing up, your concept of your identity. Yeah, just go.
Yes, absolutely. So, I feel like also we should just say, like, I feel like our whole weekend was just like a really like difficult conversations, but like nuanced converse. That was like the theme of the weekend, right? And I think
Yes.
all of this came up as a result of all the things that we experienced in New Orleans. But my identity, I grew up in the Midwest. So I grew up in Wisconsin. I lived there until I got here just a couple months ago. And interestingly, so I was homeschooled, and I think I may have mentioned this in another episode. I was homeschooled to third grade. So in terms of like, other kids I was growing up with, it was mainly just my brother and sister, kids in the neighborhood. I lived in a pretty like somewhat diverse neighborhood, and then church, right? But then in third grade, I went to private school, and I went to this small Christian private school, and there was only two other Black kids, my brother and my sister. That made up all the diversity. Everyone else in the school was white. There were no other kids of color, nothing. It was just white kids and then the three of us. And so that was a little jarring. And mainly because I think my mom and my dad, bless their hearts, they did the best they could, but they never really had a lot of conversations with us about race or racism or anything like that. And so I went into school and with no expectations of what that would look like. But I knew right away that I was different. But even still, like a lot of things happened that like made me quickly realize how different I was. And I mean, yes, it was racism, but also it was like we were like 9 or 10, right? So kids just say what they know. And so like one example have talked about before is like my hair, right? I remember at like a sleepover and everybody wanted to like play with my hair because it was different from everyone else's. And I was like, cool, of course. Like you can check out my hair. Like, yeah, get in there. Let's get right in there. Because again, I didn't have any boundaries. I didn't know any different, right? But I remember like yesterday, it was like the girl was like, ew, gross. Like, why does your hair feel like this? And it was
Mm.
because like I had like, grease in my hair. We have to moisturize our hair. And so it just felt different and it felt obviously coarser than like white hair. And I was like really, really embarrassed about it. So after that, I like did not want my mom to put any like oil or grease in my
Mm.
hair. And I remember this like vividly because my hair got so dry because I like refused to put oil in my hair. And I was like doing my hair, I had bangs. And I remember like being in the bathroom and I was like brushing my bangs and I kept seeing like things fall off. And I realized like my hair was literally breaking off.
Right.
It was so dry because I just wanted to have hair and I also asked my mom to straighten my hair. I asked for a perm. And so for Black people, when you get a perm, it makes it straight. So I did all these things in an effort to really like just fit in because I
Mm.
didn't want to feel different. And then secondly, a couple years later, I was at one of these girls. So it was like, there's like 10 of us in the class, 10 girls in the class.
Oh God.
And so like everybody was invited to like everybody's sleepovers for the most part. But this particular day it was just me at this girl's house. We were having dinner. And I don't even know how the conversation started. I just remember we were eating pizza. I remember her name. I remember the house. I remember everything about it. And like, it seems like out of nowhere, she's like, oh, my dad doesn't like Black people, but he said that you're okay. And I was, again, very embarrassed because I just didn't know. For me, that was like the first time that I was like, oh, someone might not like me just because of the color of my skin. Because to me, it's like, you don't like Black people, like you don't like any of them, you know? Okay. And so I think so I went to that school all the way through 8th grade and it just really informed my identity. And a part of that was, I think, just like conforming, right? To want to like fit in. So I very early adopted like respectability politics and like code switching and trying to talk very proper when I'm around people because in my mind, talking a certain way, acting a certain way, being the smartest meant that it was like I had to prove
Right.
that I was just as smart as the white kids. I was just as talented as the white kids. And so it definitely informs, I think, my identity and like how I have just grown up, or as I just grew up into high school and even going to college, how I felt in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very brief synopsis, and we'll get to more of that. But tell me about you, because you also have a really interesting history, right? Like you grew up in Canada, but you're not from Canada. So tell us what that's been like.
Yeah, so I was born in Iran and my family immigrated to Canada when I was 4. I turned 4 when we moved to Canada. And we moved. It wasn't like it was a choice, but it wasn't like a choice we ever really wanted to make. So we moved. If the Iranian Revolution happened before I was born, so the country changed a lot. And then the Iran-Iraq War happened in 1980, and after, like, that it was a really terrible war. And so in 1986, my family was like, "Let's go," and they applied to every English speaking country. And so the only country that accepted us was Canada. And so we moved to Canada, we moved to Vancouver, because at that time, my parents had some really close friends there. And I think that's always like the really, I think, I don't know, like one of the weirdest things about immigration, I think, is that your future is based off all these like arbitrary decisions, but not like a lot of them outside of your control. Like, what if I'd grown up in Australia, like, or what if we just went to Toronto, So you just kind of, it's like those very clear moments where you're just like, whoa, my life could have been so different. And so we moved to Vancouver, but my parents very deliberately moved us to a neighborhood that, one, was close to their friends, but also was actually not a very Iranian neighborhood. Vancouver actually has a very big Iranian population, but my parents consciously wanted us to kind of be able to take advantage of the new culture we were in. And I think that they wanted us to really figure out who we were for ourselves and not, so that was a cool thing. And I'm really happy for that. But it also means I had to have a lot of hard experiences like you did, because I was literally, again, like you, like a handful of kids at my school that wasn't white or Asian. And so that was really, really hard. I, first of all, like that thing, like your name, it's like no one like that. I think that identity around our names is such a big thing, that shame around that. Again, I have this curly hair, all these things. And like, again, bringing I'm using air quotes, ethnic food, right, to lunch when everyone's having like fucking PB&Js and you're having like, a delicacy in your country, but you're like, Mom, I just fucking want Chef Boyardee. Like, it's these little things that really make you feel so, so different. And it was also tough too. And we talked about this, first of all, I never felt like I was Canadian enough or white enough, obviously, right? But then when I grew up, right, then I didn't feel Iranian enough. And so that was a really hard thing too, because I think for those of us who are in that place, it's like, what am I? Like, you just want to know, like, am I Canadian? Am I Iranian? Like, what? I have to figure this out. Like, and that as a young child, that's like very hard to figure out and to not feel accepted. We would go back to Iran every 2 years in the summer. And it always felt like home. Like when I landed in Iran, in Tehran, it felt like the smells, the sights, the sounds felt like home. But then again, like my Farsi wasn't as good. Culturally, like things, I was like, ugh, this is like, I don't know, I was like too Canadian or too Western. And so that feeling of never fitting in definitely was something that like pervaded my entire, like, like from until my teens, late teens, and I would say my early 20s is when I first started to kind of put the pieces together for myself. So yeah, that's kind of a very condensed version of my kind of like relationship with my identity. But
Yeah, I mean, I agree with so much of what you said. I think my experience obviously wasn't nearly the same as yours. But I will say with that, like, thing about like not, so for me personally, right? Like in my household, my mom was always, both my parents are always like, again, like talk properly, speak properly, all those things. Like don't use slang, don't use ebonics. Like that was just always a thing in our household. And again, I think they were doing the best they could. They wanted us to do well. They understand the implications of race in this country without actually saying that. I think that's what they were trying to prepare us for. But it was very much this thing. So then I went to a public high school, and the public high school was relatively diverse, but it was still really interesting because it was still like, it was diverse, but it was fairly segregated. Like black kids hang out with the black kids, white kids hang out with the white kids, Asian kids hang out with the Asian kids. And so I remember my first year in high school, like I didn't know what to do, right? Because I had grown up just hanging out with like white kids in my school because there was only kids there. And then not, and then like having this sense of, not even a sense, but like Black kids always saying to me, like, why do you talk so white? Why do you sound like that? Why are you so proper? You sound like an Oreo, like all these things. And I was like, I don't know. It's the only way I know how to talk. And so this feeling of, and not knowing like slang words or not, just like, it felt like I was in like a new territory when I got to high school. And I was just like, I don't even know I don't know what these things mean. I don't know. There was just so many things I didn't know. And it felt very like disorienting. Like, where do I actually fit in? Right. Like, sure, I could continue to just like hang out with white kids because I felt comfortable in terms of like the way I talked and all of that. But then like on the flip side, like I very much knew I was Black and like wanted to like be a part of, I mean, I was proud of to be Black. So it's not like I didn't want to be Black. So it was just this weird feeling and like trying to figure out where I fit in, and what that means. And like always, and in a way, like trying to prove that I was like Black enough, which now I realize there's no such thing, right? Like there's no one way to, like Black people aren't a monolith. We can exist in all different ways. But as like a teenager, like it was really jarring, and I didn't really know how I fit into that. And like, you know, kids can be really cruel, right? And so just the idea that like I thought I was a white girl, I was trying to be a white girl, all those things that were very hurtful at the time, and I just didn't understand really how I fit into all of that.
When you were in high school, what were some of the like strategies you used to try to fit in? Do you remember?
Oh, yes, for sure. So, when I decided like, yeah, I'm gonna hang out with the Black kids. And that was great, but it was definitely much of like trying to overcompensate. And like just saying, like, I'm sure I said things I didn't know what they meant. I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna say this thing. And like trying to talk like differently, trying to use more ebonics and slang. But it wasn't like from a place of this just feels natural. It was like, no, I'm gonna force it to make myself sound like I belong. I'm sure I just sounded really, really weird. And definitely my style, I tried to like start wearing clothes that didn't really fit with what I even probably liked, but it seemed like the right thing to do to look like cool and in. And so I just really felt like I didn't know who I really was. And I was just trying to like look and imitate what I saw other people doing, what I saw other Black kids doing. I'm like, okay, that's what I need to do to be more Black. I got to dress like this, got to talk like this. And that's not to say like that every Black person I saw was doing certain things. It was just like, I was trying to pick up on what would make me seem more Black. And whatever that was, I'm going to try to do that.
It's so funny. It's like you become like an anthropologist.
Yes.
And you're like, you're trying so hard to just be accepted and approved by a community that just like, yeah, it doesn't feel like home, right? I totally know that feeling of not feeling home and just really trying to prove that you're something to someone, and they're just like, it's never enough, right? It's never enough.
Yes, you're 100% right. And I even remember thinking like, I was like in some like advanced classes, and I didn't want to be in them anymore because
Oh my gosh.
there weren't as many Black kids in the classes. So I was like, nah, forget this. I don't need to be in those classes.
Wow.
And like in hindsight, I mean, it's fine. I turned out fine. Everything's fine. But like in hindsight, I definitely think I sold myself short, because I just so desired to be around people who looks like me, or at least a lot of them in those classes. There was just like a few of us. And I wanted people to think, well, I'm just like you, which again, with classes you're in has nothing to do with like who you're like. But for me, I was just like, oh yeah, I need to do whatever I can do to just fit in.
And it's so interesting because I can definitely, for myself, like my you touched upon this, but like my tendencies to be like perfect, to be the best, to like always know the answer. I definitely like trace those back to that feeling of being that young immigrant girl who had the coarse hair with the weird lunch, who with the weird name, right? And I needed something because like it's like that. I don't remember the first time that I probably like got praise because I did something really well. But I can imagine that for the first time getting a sense of approval as a kid, you're like, oh, okay, cool. So when I'm smart, you know, or when I do well at X, Y, and Z, that's when they see me. Like they finally see me then in a way that's positive, not in a way that's like, you're different, you're weird, you, but like, oh, there's something special, quote unquote, about you. And so like I see that manifesting in my life, that need, but it comes from that time for sure.
Oh, I 100% agree with you. And I think for me too, that's played out in a lot of ways. So for one, when I first went to the school, in third grade, and I knew I was the only Black kid in the class, I felt like I had, like, this is feeling of like you are speaking for all Black people right now,
Oof.
right? And so it was just like definitely the sense of like having to like be the best. I remember like crying when I get like B's, right? I'm like, oh my God, what are they gonna think about? It was just always, but even still, like those are hard habits to break because I still see myself playing out some of that stuff in adulthood, right? And this idea of like, I'm going to be in the room and I'm going to show any of these white people who might think something about Black people that that's not the case, right? Or I'm not like that. And I think we got into this a little bit, right? About this idea of like Black excellence and that like, oh, I'm not that kind of a Black person. And those are my own like internalized like oppression, racism, white supremacy that I still am working on letting go of, because for one, I don't speak for all Black people, and for two, it is not my responsibility in the world to try to prove to like white people that I'm a different kind of a Black person, or that there isn't even a different kind of Black people, or that that means anything. I mean, that's a really deep conversation, but definitely have seen myself. And I think not only have I seen myself be doing that, I've seen how people react to me, right?
Mm.
I mean, I'm sure maybe you've had this. Have people like, oh my God, you're so smart. You speak so well, which to me is very strange because I don't ever see white people telling other white people they speak so well,
Right.
right? And so it's again this idea that they don't expect that from me. And so by me being excellent in some way, I'm showing them there's something different. But really, that's just like, that's really just reiterating the same like racist bullshit, honestly, right?
Right. It's almost like when with immigrants are like, oh, your English is so good.
Right.
And it's like, fuck you, your English as an English speaker is terrible.
Right.
You're,
Oh my God, can you start saying that to people?
it's like so funny because
It's
actually like
true.
my parents, they're like they have their moments with English, but like actually immigrants usually have to learn like,
The
proper
real right.
English, right? So they're often speaking far better than like a normal person. And I just, yeah, it's so incredibly frustrating to me. Like, oh, your English is so good. One of now we get into like racist comments, but I would say the most racist comment, I mean, I've actually had a lot, but one of them that ties to this and what you're talking about is I was working with like a tutor at the time, and she was an older woman. She was an older Jewish woman, and she found out I was Muslim. And she looked at me and she's like, "Oh, you're Muslim." I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "But you're so nice."
What?
Right? And I was like 16 or 17 at the time. And
Wow.
right, like I think that's also like when it comes to all this stuff, what's so saddening, I think, is that we as children did not have the language, the knowledge,
Mhm.
like to process these experiences. Instead, like we know it feels really uncomfortable. We know it doesn't feel good, but we just kind of are like, okay, like you don't know what to do. Even as an adult, most of the time, when you're faced with something that like racist or sexist or whatever, you freeze, right?
Right.
Like you don't
Right.
even know how to respond. But as a child, like I'm like, wow, having to endure those experiences, like I feel such a sense of like sadness and compassion and empathy for myself because like regardless of whatever coping strategies we used, we got through it, like we got through it, you know?
Absolutely. I have a question about that. So,
Yeah.
did you ever talk to your parents or your family about that?
No, I don't think I did. Did you?
No, so this is what's been coming up for me when we're having this conversation, is speaking of like not having the tools to like deal with it or process it, or almost feeling like a sense of embarrassment maybe. So when you were telling about this story and we're thinking, I'm like, what are some of the like really messed up things that people said to me younger? I remember I was like 16, I was working at Target. And it's when like those like how like now we all put our cards in the readers, but like back in the day you had to like, it was like a different system, right?
Right.
So it was like they were just introducing some like newer technology, and this white man and women were in my line. I was checking them out, and then I was like explaining their new system, and then the man says, "Wow, they can teach monkeys to do anything."
Oh my God,
I
Chrissy.
froze. And then his wife was clearly embarrassed, and she like elbowed him to like be quiet. But like I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. But
Hmm.
then also thinking about this, like I don't remember ever talking to anybody about it or talking to my parents about it. I just like, again, it's like this coping, you just do the best you can and just try to like survive, right? And I mean, I think, and maybe I don't know, like I think too, like some of those memories, I just like lock them away.
Mm.
because I think that's what I did to cope at the time.
I totally agree. And we talked about this while we were in New Orleans,
Yeah.
which is like almost like compartmentalizing trauma or these experiences because it's just so overwhelming. And also, you know, it's a coping mechanism for sure, but it does catch up to you. That's why
Oh yeah.
like coaching, therapy, all that stuff is like needed. Because I also think part of our identity as immigrants or as people of color in this country, in this hemisphere, northern whatever, is to just get through it. Like, you
Right.
know, just get through it. Just like
Survival.
survival, right?
Yeah.
But it will catch up with you, and so I think that that's kind of the work that me and Chrissy are doing. Hopefully, if you're listening, you're doing it as well. Of course, this is a very privileged discussion, right? Because we have the time and the money to be able to invest in those things,
Resources.
right?
Right.
But you're listening to this podcast, right? So that means that you have a resource to be hearing other people in the shared experience, right? But I certainly did not have, we didn't have anything like this. Like, no,
No.
I felt like if it wasn't for my sister, I wouldn't have known that there were other people who, you know, had this stuff going on.
Right. I just like there weren't even podcasts back then, were there? Like the internet was like barely alive. Like we
I think it was
weren't
called
as
radio,
I
Chrissy. It
think
was called radio.
radio. Yes, I do think they had that actually. You're right. I think it was a thing called radio. That's how old we are, y'all.
But
No, I'm just kidding.
speaking on that, right? Identity, I will say it is so huge. And I feel like this is something that like the future generations have, which is like seeing yourself in media, in the world is so incredibly important. Like we did not have as many examples as I think kids do today. And of course, there's a lot of work to be done. But I think when it comes to identity, seeing all these different types of identity, and of course, we're not even, we're just talking about our lived experience. So this doesn't include a lot of
So
other
many other.
identities,
Yeah,
right?
so many other.
Um, we need a lot more representation, but like now I'm like, hell's yeah, you need representation because as a young child, had I had that, you know, that would have been so incredible.
I mean, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I just think again, like the internet, right? Having the ability to just like Google some things and then just realize, oh wow, someone else has the same experience as me. I'm not alone in this by myself. And it's definitely and again, like having the ability to like connect with people, whether it be via podcast or via Instagram or via whatever, to other people around the world and that have similar worldviews, similar experiences. And even if like they're not right there in the same space with you, it helps you realize that like the things that you're feeling or experiencing, you're not alone in those things.
Mm.
And I definitely don't think that I had that when I was growing up.
Oh, no. And when you talk about that too, like I had this discussion with my parents about like racism, like they experienced racism for sure. And I was like, you know, my dad was like, you know, now looking back on it, like that was definitely racism. But he's like, we were just like, we were trying to get through life, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And he was like, if we were to stop and start every time something like that happened, he's like, we wouldn't have gotten very far.
Right.
Which is sad, super sad that like they didn't have the tools to kind of process it but also like, it's like, there was no discussion around this. So if somebody said, "Oh my God, that's racist," nobody would have taken you seriously back then. They still don't take you seriously now, right? So it's like, what would that actually have done for my parents? You know?
No. Yeah, that's exactly accurate. And I think that goes back to that piece about compartmentalizing. Right? Because sometimes that's what's necessary because if you stopped every time, like you wouldn't be able to survive to get you still have the life, right? Like life still has to happen. And so when you were just talking about like the privilege that we have to like spend time thinking about these things, doing therapy, like working on ourselves, investing in ourselves, to heal some of this stuff, it is such a privilege, right? I think about that all the time. Like, yes, there's like layers of like oppression that I experience, but I have so much privilege in my life. I acknowledge it all the time because there's people who look like me who don't even have the space to like even think about this, right? Because they're like literally just trying to survive. And
Mm.
so it is such a privilege for me to be able to do this work and to think about these things. And this is also why I think, and I talk about all the time, like layers of oppression, like systematic oppression, it affects people in different ways. Because for so many people who are, again, far more marginalized than I am, like the trauma they're dealing with, they can't even stop to process it or even recognize or understand that they're even experiencing trauma, maybe.
Yeah, it's such a good point. Yeah, with trauma too, it's like there is, I don't know, for those of us who've experienced trauma, um, there is this fear that if you like actually open up those compartments, that you're just never going to be able, even me, like as someone who has done the work, there's certain boxes that I have that are still kind of scary to dive into and go deep into. And even right now, like I'm kind of going through something that's forcing me to kind of reopen some of those boxes, and it's been incredibly, yeah, terrible. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It is. I mean, even like this weekend, we were doing the tour, right? Like a lot of emotions came up for me having after doing that. Because it opens up a lot of those boxes, right? That's really, really hard to open up. And sometimes you don't want to open them at the moment. Like you just don't want to sometimes because it's hard, right? It's really, really hard. Like you just said, like some things are happening right now in your life, it forces you to look at some things and it's like really uncomfortable and it makes you like, for me, like when I keep those boxes open too long, I don't know if you agree, like I feel like an overwhelming sense of grief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can get specific on what's been happening, but
Yeah.
so right now I know this podcast is going to air a little bit later, but in Iran there is an internet ban. So all internet for about 4 days now has been completely shut down, but that's because there are protests happening in the country. Um there's been a lot of stuff happening there. Um and it's really scary, like as someone who had to leave a country because of a war, because of a revolution, seeing the images that look so similar to things that we have seen as Iranians in the past. Like, so all of those memories of that trauma are like flooding up for me. Stuff that I have compartmentalized, right? Because Iran's always in the news and there's always little things of, oh, we're like, are we gonna like bomb Iran? Are we gonna bomb Iran? And so you have this as humans, as our bodies are very intelligent, right? So they have this ability to be like, okay, you don't have to worry right now. You don't have to worry. You don't have to worry. But it's like still there, right? It's like this little small light flashing, and then now it's like a floodlight, right? It
Yeah.
feels like a total floodlight on this trauma. But you're absolutely right. Like I've had a couple of days this past week where it's been intense grief, just sobbing for no reason, right? Like kind of, and I've told everyone around me about it, so they're um very kind of gentle with me and are nurturing. That's been good, but you're right. It's like you think, it's like I know this isn't true, but like you think you're quote unquote okay.
You're good.
You're good.
Everything's good.
I'm
I'm
good. Like
good.
I've done the
Yeah.
work. I'm
I'm
fine.
good. I'm ready. I did the work.
And then all of a sudden you see an image in the newspaper, or you hear a story, or you see a video, and it's like all of a sudden it just comes rushing back to you, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, and of course, like those images are triggering to you, right? Like why wouldn't they be? And again, I
Well,
think
like just like when we were in New Orleans.
right, right? Like of course is and that's why I think it's also like I love social media, I love the internet, but I do think like for me, I know one thing that I had to personally do to like to be okay myself is like I stopped following a lot of accounts that were like sharing information about things that were happening or like another incident of police brutality. Like I already know that these things happen, and seeing those videos or seeing those images it's the same thing, right? Like it brings all those things back up. And so for me, I just had to be like, okay, I know these really messed up things happen in the world. I don't need to see them in my face every day because it was just too much. It was like that constantly opening that trauma back up again. And so yeah, I mean, I think all of this is so deeply tied into our identities and the way that we see and experience the world. And so it's just so important, I think, for all of us to be really cognizant and sensitive about the way we talk about things or what we're sharing, because we don't know who's like who is going to the things that we are sharing with people, we don't know how it's going to affect other people. And I just think we always do need to be really, really cognizant of that.
I love actually how like we veered off into trauma, because when I think of it, like our trauma informs our identity.
Yeah.
Like it informs so much of our identity. It's also like I feel like our trauma is often, it is the place where like the most beautiful growth happens, and the work
Yes.
that both of you and I are doing is because of this trauma. It's because of those lived experiences we had that were kind of real shitty.
Yeah.
So while we can be grateful for them, And I think that's also a result of the work to be able to see the beauty in the shit.
Right.
It's also to be like, okay, but that really fucking sucked.
Right.
And that certain things will still bring that up,
Suck.
right?
Yeah, it will bring it up. And I mean, and I think one of the things that we talked about this weekend, we were talking about identities and all that. I mean, again, now we're talking about trauma, but the fact of the matter is it's really hard to completely heal from your traumas when they're still happening, or the very similar things are still occurring. It makes it difficult to completely heal those things. But again, you're right in that our traumas do so much inform our identities. Like for me, they're like tied hand in hand to so many of our stories in this country, or even how this country was founded, right, is based in like heartache and trauma. And so 100% that informs all of our identities and how we experience the world and how we are living day to day.
Chrissy, should I share your favorite quote of mine about, I don't know if it fits in here, but about oppressed people?
Oh my God, please. Okay, so speaking, yes, because we're talking about the joy, right? The joy.
Right, the joy. Because the goodness that comes from trauma, because it just made me think of that. So I've always thought this, but Chrissy and I had gone to, there's a really great kind of Jewish deli in Brooklyn, and they have amazing babka. So they had, so good. So we were like eating the babka, and like in the middle of eating the babka, I said to Chrissy, I'm like, yo, oppressed people make the best food.
They do.
So true.
So true.
Like, oh my God, like Black culture in this country, Middle Eastern food, like come on. Like, when was the last time you're like, I really wish I had like German food?
Nobody said that.
Nobody said that. Nobody said that. You know what they want?
No,
they want to go get fried chicken.
Yes.
Babka. They want a shawarma.
That's exactly. But then what happened in New Orleans? What else do they make the best?
They make the best food, and they make the best music.
Yes.
It's true. Oppressed people make the best food and the best music.
But this is what we're talking about. Beauty from the ashes, right? Yes. Like that's what we do really, really well.
I mean, come on, like so much innovation from all the shit, like so many forms of like capoeira, which is like the Brazilian martial arts. Black slaves created that. They made it into a quote unquote dance, but it was actually a form of defense. Like so much of the music in this country.
I didn't even know that. You just schooled me right now.
Oh my God. Wow. Yeah. Like, so many parts of our culture that we love are actually a result of trauma and our ancestors being motherfucking resilient. And I think that that's what we're doing now too, right?
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my God, I just love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I didn't know that, and that's amazing.
Yeah.
And you're right. Resilience is like the underlying theme of all of this, to be honest, right? And so, and even in how we, like, I don't think we had the healthiest coping mechanisms when we were children, we were growing up, but that was us doing what we had to do to survive. And like you said, we're still here and we're doing fine. That was our resilience.
Yeah.
That's how we exhibited that. We are resilient. That's just what it is.
Yeah. I was on a call the other day with some of my, like a group coaching program I have. And, you know, we were talking about like the beliefs that we have that are like so negative, right? Like negative thinking. And I said to the women, I'm like, but you also have to like really be thankful for these things because they brought you this far. Like all of y'all have internet connection. You're in homes. You're like, you know, investing in a program that's so like all of these thoughts, even though now it's time to work in a different pathway, they actually brought you super far, right? Mm-hmm. So it's also remembering that our trauma can be the source of a lot of quote unquote good stuff, right?
100%.
We agree. We just went there, Chrissy.
We just did that.
I do want to bring it back to I like very strictly identity, but for you then now as a grown-ass woman, a GAW, what do you think, what is your relationship now with your identity? How do you define yourself, or do you define yourself? What is your identity?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because now as a grown-ass woman, for one, like I've let go of so many things, right? Like I know now that my Black is not tied to like how I dress or how I look or how I wear my hair. Obviously, you know, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're not, I wear my hair in its natural state. I did that when I went back natural when I was like in my 20s. Just like after like a series of like bad hair experiments, like frying and dyeing my hair. I was just like, I'm so over this. And so like, I literally just cut it all off. I had this little short afro, and I've always worn my hair natural since then. And I just feel, it just feels me. Like I feel very like myself. And so, you know, even now in a time where like natural hair is still, I mean, they just like made a law that say you can't discriminate against hair in New York, which is ridiculous that still happens. But
Oh
even
my
still,
God.
I'm just like, this is what my hair is, and I feel really comfortable in my skin. I love being a Black woman. Like I always say this, like if I come back 100 more times in life, I would love to come back as a Black woman every single time. I just really love, I just love who I am, and I love being a Black woman. I just think we are resilient, and I just appreciate who I am so much. But I think like identities shift as we age, right? So there have been other identities I've picked up along the way that served me for a time, but like don't necessarily serve me anymore. So I still like, now I'm 33, and I feel like this transitional period in my life where I'm like letting go of some other identities I picked up along the way. So it's interesting. I feel the most myself I've ever been. And even in that process of like letting go of things that no longer serve me, it's not always been easy, but it feels just right. Like, and it feels so good. So I'm really like, it's weird because I always thought like 30, it's not even, I always thought, like I would even say like earlier this year, like in January of this year, I'm like, oh my God, I'm 33, and like, that's so old. I don't know what I'm doing. But now I feel like, oh my God, I'm so young. I have like, what was I ever talking about? And just like getting really comfortable being me. So yeah. What about you?
I think for me, it was like the realization that like I get to define my culture and I get to define my identity, which was really empowering, and that doesn't have to do with any set prescribed way of what an Iranian woman is supposed to be like, or a white woman or Canadian or Western, whatever that is, and that I can be so many things. And now I see it as such a privilege that I can draw upon my Iranian. Like I always say first, I'm Iranian. Like that is what I first identify with. And I don't even care if an Iranian person gives me the side eye, but like that is who I am.
Right.
And it's really working through that, like other people's judgment of what they think their culture or their, you know, race, quote unquote, is.
Right.
So that's been like, that has been a process for me of just not giving any F's around
Yeah.
what people think of how I identify, which is like something I've really had to work through. Again, we've brought this up before, but I think it's also, I was very privileged to move to New York in my early 20s, where I'm in a city where people are constantly redefining themselves and claiming identities for themselves, not really caring what people think, right? And so growing up in that space and in that environment, and I know that's not the experience of many people who may be listening to this podcast, right? And so I like that was easier for me, but it's not to say that it's not impossible to do. But to have that freedom to come here and be like, oh shoot, I can like dress how I want to, I can, you know, speak how I want to speak, do all these things, and people still respect me. That's amazing. So that's why I love this city.
I love the city too, by the way.
I'm so glad you're here, Chrissy. I'm so glad.
So glad.
We got real close to the mic.
We're having a moment right now.
Okay. So that's kind of like, I feel like our preliminary thoughts on identity, the tip of the iceberg.
Very tip of the iceberg. But that's what we got time for today.
Yes. So Chrissy, what is our asking for a friend?
Oh my gosh. We have a very, very special asking for a friend today. So here's the question. It's about dating, which I don't think we've had any asking for a friend questions about dating, right?
Nope.
All right. Okay. So I'm just going to be honest. I'm going to say the question, and then Shirin, I'm going to give it to you because I feel like you have a lot of dating experience to pull from.
I do.
I've told her before she should write a book about this, but I don't know if that'll ever come to fruition. But anyways, here's the question. And this person is new to the dating game, but like not looking for anything serious, but just wanting to have a fun time. How do you approach that conversation, like on a first date? Is it something you tell the person right away? I'm not looking for anything serious. I just like want to have a good time and see where this goes. Or do you withhold that information and tell them later, or only tell them if it just naturally comes up?
Okay. So there's a couple things here. So in the game of dating, in the world of dating, I think that you should be upfront with what you really want. right? Like I remember I went on a Tinder date with this guy, and I got to the first date, and like I had to go all the way to like, I don't know, a part of Brooklyn that's far from me. Like I had to really put in work to see this guy. And I got there and we're like having a great breakfast. And then like literally when the check comes, he's like, oh, by the way, I'm in an open relationship. What?
Oh, I feel like that was not the right time to tell you that.
No, like that, like things like that, for instance, like that should be explicit from the get, because that is something that is so polarizing and not for everyone. And so like that for me, I was like, wow, not cool, not cool. That should have been said. Now for you saying like, hey, I just want like, so this is the problem, is if a guy says that, then a girl's like, okay, great to know. And maybe they explore other options. It may actually make, I honestly feel like guys will be more attracted to that person, because either A, they're going to be like, oh, well, I'll convince her. I mean, girls will do this too. Like, I'll convince.
Yeah, men, you're right. Men think they can convince women of anything.
Yes. Because you're like, oh, I don't even want this. And I feel
like, oh, I'm going to show her.
Remember, okay, Chrissy and I went to this like a stoop sale, and like this is an example of that. We went to a stoop sale. There was this blanket. I didn't know if I wanted it. I went to go purchase it, and someone I knew who was there was like, "Hey, if you don't get that blanket, I'll take it. I want it." And so all of a sudden in my head, I was like, "Well, if they want it, then I want it." So it's like that same thing where it's like, even if they don't want to be in a relationship, I feel like if you say that, then they're like, "Well, fuck.
I'm gonna like know me."
Like it's, so I don't know. So I feel like with guy, I'm not a guy. I don't want to generalize guys. And actually, I also don't want to presume that this person is dating men, right? So
I don't know. We don't know who this person's dating.
So again, actually, I really apologize for that, because I'm just assuming that this person is interested in men. But from my experience dating men, I find that either or they then just think you're a fuck buddy. Right. And so, and if that is something you want, then that's great. I have made tons of fuck buddies and it was great. Oh my God. I hope my mom doesn't listen to this. Mom,
I had me tons of fuck buddies.
Oh my God. That's the next t-shirt. That's the next
my God. We make. Tons of fuck buddies.
Hashtag tons of fuck buddies. Okay. Mom is not actually, thank God for the Iran internet ban. We need
she can't hear this episode.
Wow. See, joy from my pain. So I will say, so then I think it also will sometimes, but I do think you need to be upfront and say, hey, listen, like, I would love to get to know you better. I think you're really fun to hang out with, but I'm not looking for anything serious. And at the same time, I'm not just into a fuck buddy, like whatever. And maybe you are into a fuck buddy, like that's fine. But I think being really upfront is the key. But then how the other person takes it, that's not in your control. Like you've already said what you want. If they choose to believe you, if they choose not to believe you, then that's not on you anymore. I think that's the thing with dating is like, it's like we like, say what you need up front, but then if the person perceives it another way, that's off your shoulders at that point. What do you think, Chrissy?
I mean, I think that's great advice. And y'all, I haven't dated in 100 years, so I got like nothing to offer that, but I think that was fabulous advice. I agree. I do think it's just being upfront and being honest is the best thing you can do in any situation. And you're right in that whatever people decide to do with that information is on them. And I think that's something that we all have to get better at, not just in dating, but in life, right? We speak our truth. Other people don't have to like it. They don't have to agree with it. Shirin reminds me of this all the time. And it's just like, it's okay. People are allowed to feel the way they feel.
Yes.
So yeah,
that's the advice I would give to that person. But also like my experience dating, I loved it so much. It was such a fun time in my life. I got to meet some really cool people. I got to experience some really great things, but I also had like a really positive mindset going into it. If I ever felt unsafe, I followed my intuition and I didn't follow up with that person or didn't, I actually, knock on wood, I never had, knock on wood, as if oh God, I hope I never go on another date in my life.
I'm like, are you dating again?
But I never had, a traumatic experience dating. I think I'm very fortunate, but also I know that whenever I felt a little bit like, oh, I don't know, I trusted that voice. And I think that's actually a beautiful part of dating is like really getting in touch with your own intuition. And I think dating is like, it's a practice. It's practice. It's such great practice of like figuring out what you want, figuring out what you don't want, figuring out what you like and you don't like, and don't take it so seriously.
I think that's fabulous advice. And I do think like approaching it with like, I'm just having a good time. I'm going to have a good, and also expecting to have a good experience.
Yes.
Not being like, dating sucks. This is the worst. But like, expect to have a good experience. And like you said, treat it like a practice. That's really great. That's some solid advice there, Shirin.
Thank you very much. Oh my God, that was weird. Okay, well, we really hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you have a question for a friend, please send us those. You can DM us, you can leave a comment, email us, whatever, but we would love to answer your friends' questions.
I agree. So I think that's it for today. Thank y'all so much for listening.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of TGTS. If you like today's episode, please subscribe, review, or leave a comment for us. And please share the TGTS love. Until next week, bye.